It is 7 o'clock, which means you're watching the only breakfast show live from Westminster. A blueprint for a green revolution. The government is setting out its vision for the world's first low-carbon industrial sector, with the aim of cutting industrial emissions by a third in 15 years. We'll be asking the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, about that in just a moment. But also this morning, swapping torture and persecution in North Korea for local government in Greater Manchester. We'll be speaking to the defector, hoping to become a Conservative councillor in Bury at 20 to 9. But also on the programme,
all the times you sort of miss with someone, and you should just do it, shouldn't you?
remembering Caroline Flack. We'll be speaking to the director of the new documentary looking at the life and death of the television presenter. It is Wednesday, the 17th of March. Stealing a march on the rest of the world. Prolific burglars will be made to wear GPS tags to crack down on reoffending.
We know where they are at all times for a year. We'll help them stay on the straight and narrow and help us catch up with them if they don't.
The ugly side of the beautiful game. Victims hope for justice ahead of the publication of a delayed report into football's child sex abuse scandal.
Me personally, there's only one word that I want. I didn't want 900 pages, I just wanted the word sorry.
In the driving seat, new employment rights for 70,000 Uber workers from today, following a win at the Supreme Court. Not exactly plain sailing. P&O Cruises say that unvaccinated holidaymakers won't be welcome on trips this summer.
Chilly for North Sea coastal counties today, with some rain coming into eastern and southeast England later. Otherwise, there will be some sunshine, quite warm in that as well. More details coming up before past.
Morning all. Burglars, robbers and thieves released from prison will be made to wear GPS tags to track their movements in a new initiative targeting neighbourhood crime. More than half of those convicted of theft and burglary reoffend within a year. Nearly 80% of cases result in no suspect being identified. The government scheme is the first of its kind in the world and will launch next month in 6 police force areas. Sky's Sadia Chowdhury has our first report.
Every morning, Tony Anthony opens his deli with nearly the same routine. But on May 4th, 4 years ago, this place was a crime scene.
I found this door against its hinges open out on the pavement area, bent like an S banana.
The police never caught the men who burgled Tony's deli, even though they told him they knew who they were.
There's been a lot of repeat burglaries in the area, but unfortunately they have to catch them in the act in order to charge them, and on that evening they were not caught.
Now, new technology to crack down on neighbourhood criminals.
Burglars, thieves and robbers who have served a year or more in prison will be fitted with a tag when they're released. This will monitor their whereabouts using GPS satellites 24 hours a day for up to 12 months.
We know where they are at all times for a year. We'll help them stay on the straight and narrow and help us catch up with them if they don't.
The government hopes this will be a vital extra source of intelligence to help police catch persistent offenders.
It sits as part of what we call integrated offender management. I say where we're working with offenders, making sure that the 3 pillars of success in their lives, so having a job, having a home and having a friend, someone to hold their hand, are in place along with the tagging program to make sure that we break the cycle of reoffending.
It's a world first, but there are challenges.
The technology isn't foolproof. Burglars are very adept at working their way around it. I'm not going to broadcast how that is. There's also another aspect, of course, that the tag is visible. And it may be either a badge of honour or it may be a stigma. I don't know. People may be actually ashamed of walking the streets with a tag on because they're basically highlighting, I am a criminal.
More than half of people convicted of theft and burglary reoffend within a year, and almost 80% of cases result in no suspect being identified. Just like in Tony's case, he spent over £2,000 on reinforcing security. The government hopes the tagging system will save the taxpayer billions of pounds. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News in Manchester.
Also this morning, the government is committing £1 billion to create the world's first low-carbon industrial sector as they outline spending to slash emissions from industry, schools and hospitals. The blueprint is aimed at helping the UK reach the target of net zero by 2050, with the government saying it will also help to create 80,000 jobs across the country over the next 3 decades. Very pleased to say the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, joins us once again on the programme. Mr Kwarteng, great to see you this morning. So do tell us just a little bit about this latest phase in the Green Revolution.
I think it's really important to remember that we were the first major industrial country to legislate for the net zero carbon emissions target. That was 2 years ago. And this measure actually is going to drive our commitments to net zero by saying the industrial sector, all the industry that we produce, our manufacturing as well, process, will actually conform with net zero. We're going to reduce carbon emissions. We've got great ambitions in this area. But all the time, we're thinking about creating jobs, creating new industries, and also attracting inward investment. Lots of people are very interested in our ideas, in our leadership, in fighting climate change.
It is slightly away from your brief, but clearly the focus in all of this is the industrial element of things. But what about domestic? What about homes? I mean, the Climate Change Committee suggests that we need an additional £3 billion a year if we're going to hit that net zero target. £3 billion on top of the £3 billion we already spend, but all aimed at that kind of domestic setting.
Yeah, I think the domestic sector is clearly very challenging. We've got lots of housing stock that we want to retrofit, make more energy efficient. And there are a number of schemes that are promoting that. We've committed also to in the manifesto to billions of pounds over the next 10 years to make sure that homes and public buildings as well are retrofitted and made more energy efficient so that we can reduce those carbon emissions.
How, though, are you going to restore the confidence of the business community after, you essentially binned the industrial strategy that everyone was working on?
It's not a question of binning it, Neil. What I've said repeatedly is that industrial strategy was in 2017, came out in October 2017. I remember it well. And a lot of things have happened since October 2017. We've had a Brexit deal. We've had COVID-19, which nobody knew about, obviously, in 2017. And we've also got the net zero legislation that I've just been talking about. So the world of 2021 is very different. And everyone could see that the industrial strategy needed refreshing. So then the debate became about what were we going to call it? And we decided to rebrand it to meet the new challenges that we face.
Minister, just on your brief as well, some news this morning about the gig economy directly relating to that Supreme Court decision about Uber. There are 70,000 drivers now getting guaranteed minimum wage, holiday pay, pensions, well, related to the time that they're on. I'm less interested in the specifics about the Uber case, but is this the start of kind of better regulation within the gig economy? If so, I mean, is that something that you're entirely sanguine with?
Absolutely to be welcomed. I've always said, I think even on a programme like this, I've always said that the new phase of our economy should be about protecting workers' rights, driving higher standards, driving new technologies in the way that we were talking about earlier. And I think that the government's record on things like the national living wage that we introduced has been very good. And we want to see a well-paid workforce with strong worker protections, driving innovation and economic progress. And I think that's something that we can achieve.
I do want to ask you about a story relating to your colleague, the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, a leaked conversation that he had with Business, where he said, "I squarely believe we ought to be trading liberally around the world. If we restrict it to countries with ECHR, European Convention on Human Rights level standards of human rights, we're not going to do many trade deals with the growth markets of the future." Should we be dealing with people at all who are in breach of, generally accepted standards of human rights?
I think that the Foreign Secretary is right. We should be trading with countries, but at the same time, we've got to make very strong representations, as we do, when we think that countries are mistreating minorities, using torture, and not sharing our values. But what we can't do is simply say, cut whole countries off and refuse to engage while telling them how to run their own countries. We've got to be flexible. And in international context, we've got to trade. We've got to trade, but also we've got to...
Yeah, I understand that, but the Foreign Secretary also in the conversation said this. You know, I can think of behaviour that would cross the line and render a country beyond the pale. So I'm just wondering where that line is drawn. I mean, it's not about, for example, the genocide of the Uyghur Muslims. We're still carrying on our trade with China. You know, it doesn't relate to Saudi Arabia. You know, we've been dealing them weapons, which we know have been used in the conflict in Yemen. We maintain trade with the United States, a country which has a history of executing mentally ill criminals. I'm just wondering where the line is.
I'm not sure what you're suggesting, that we stop trade with the United States. I mean, that seems like a bizarre suggestion.
Well, I'm asking where he said, you know, the Foreign Secretary said, I can think of behaviour that would cross the line and render a country beyond the pale. Where is the line?
I agree with what the Foreign Secretary said about trade. I think you obviously have to take each circumstance as it comes. I think that there are serious issues with China, and we've made representations to them. Our ambassador is doing a great job. And in fact, she's been mentioned not altogether favourably by the Chinese government. We're always making representations to governments to treat people fairly and to observe standards in human rights.
Sure, but just in terms of, OK, it goes to the integrated review that was published in the Commons yesterday. There is clearly a strategic difference between the way that we're dealing with Russia and China. I'm just wondering what the justification for that difference is, given that there is abundant evidence that the Chinese authorities have been part of a genocide of the Uyghur Muslim community.
You're absolutely right, Neil. And what I've tried to say is that our ambassador in China has made really strong representations to the Chinese government about their behaviour. And we've said that we don't find this remotely acceptable. And we're trying to make international calls, alliances, to make those representations to the Chinese government. We're absolutely very firm on that. At the same time, we are attracting Chinese investment. If you go to a city like Sheffield, you'll see lots of Chinese investment coming into this country. But you've got to distinguish between investors, private citizens, people that we trade with, and actual governments.
Can I just finish our time this morning, Minister, by talking about COVID-19? And this morning, The Guardian has a rather big piece about, you know, where we are, where we've been, and where we're going. Now, we had a promise from the Prime Minister that there would be an inquiry into the government's handling of COVID-19. That promise was given in July. We still don't have a date for that. I know when I'm getting my next haircut, on April the 12th. We don't know when this inquiry is going to start. Given we've got something of a roadmap in place, isn't now about time for you to start moving forward with this?
Well, look, I think lots of people have different views about this. Personally, I think that what we have to do is get through the roadmap. I think we've got to reopen the economy. And then once the economy's reopened, once we've got through the worst of the pandemic, and it's still with us, we can have a debate, and I'm sure that there'll be plenty of room for an inquiry. But we haven't, it seems premature to launch an inquiry when the pandemic is still all around us.
I completely agree. But at the same time, we know that by the other side of the summer, according to the roadmap, things should be pretty much back to normal. And going by the data that's presented, going by the evidence that the government scientists have put forward, it seems we're on track for that. It does rather feel like you yourself are suggesting that inquiry could get started some point this year, certainly the other side of the summer.
All I'm saying is that we should wait and see this process through. We've got a roadmap. We've got various dates. I think the next significant date is April the 12th, when non-essential retail will be opening up. And all I'm saying is that we've got to try and get through that process, reopen the economy, see what the effects, the medium-term effects of COVID have been, look at the employment situation, and then I'm sure there'll be plenty of room and plenty of appetite for a full inquiry as to what happened.
Certainly in terms of the appetite. Kwasi Kwarteng, great to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Plenty more coming up on the show this morning. We're going to be getting Labour's take on the controversial new policing and crime bill. The Shadow Justice Secretary, David Lammy, will be joining us at 8:05. We'll be talking to the Mayor of County Waterford about his call to celebrate St Patrick's Day at home for a second time. That's at 8:20. And at 8:30, I'll be asking the President of P&O Cruises about the chances of setting sail on holiday this summer. But now, the Football Association will today release a report into decades of child abuse in the sport, more than 4 years after it was launched in the wake of an avalanche of accusations by former players. The report by Clive Sheldon QC, delayed several times, will look at how the FA, clubs and individuals handled reports of abuse made to them between 1970 and 2005 and make recommendations on safeguarding. Sky Sports correspondent Martha Kellner reports.
It's been over 4 years since Andy Woodward revealed horrific abuse by paedophile coach Barry Bennell. Now, are we about to finally discover the full extent of the game's sex abuse scandal? The FA's independent report is expected to be at least 700 pages long and detail the abuse of hundreds of boys by dozens of coaches spanning 4 decades. It will make a judgment about whether football's darkest secret was covered up.
900 pages seems a lot, but there's only one word. Me personally, there's only one word that I want. I didn't want 900 pages. I just wanted the word sorry.
In November 2016, Andy Woodward revealed he was sexually abused as a child by former coach Barry Bennell. Later that month, several clubs, including Crewe Alexandra, Manchester City and Chelsea, launched independent reviews into historic abuse. In December 2016, the FA began an independent inquiry led by barrister Clive Sheldon QC. In February 2018, Barry Bennell was jailed for 30 years for 50 counts of child sexual abuse. The release of Clive Sheldon's report has been delayed several times, which survivors say was deeply upsetting. Now they fear a watered-down document which doesn't punish the adults who failed to report the abuse.
This report is likely to trigger an apology from the Football Association. What it will also look at is whether there was any conspiracy within the game, or at least whether there was any collusion between abusive coaches.
Bob Higgins was sentenced to 24 years in jail in 2019 for abusing boys at Southampton Football Club. There is evidence to suggest he also knew Barry Bennell. Some victims believe there was a paedophile ring in football, but it's thought the report does not arrive at that conclusion. For the survivors, it's not just been 4 years waiting for this report, but in many cases decades waiting for justice, now hoping football doesn't fail them again. Martha Kellner, Sky News.
Let's take a look at a couple of the other stories making the news this morning. The majority of the public think the police were right to break up the vigil being held in memory of Sarah Everard on Saturday. That according to a survey from YouGov, which found 53% of people in general and 56% of men agreed with the police actions. But most 18 to 24-year-olds disagreed. They said the Met were wrong to behave in the way they did. At least 8 people have been killed and another has been injured in a series of shootings in the US city of Atlanta. The attacks took place in 3 spas to the northeast of the city, with reports that a number of the victims are Asian. A 21-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the incident. Police are still determining if the shootings are related. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has been asked to explain fresh allegations of interference by her Chief of Staff in a sexual misconduct investigation. The Conservative MP, David Davis, used parliamentary privilege in Westminster to allege that civil servants exchanged messages suggesting that Liz Lloyd was interfering in the complaints process against Mr Salmond. He said the message was sent on the 6th of February 2018. That's 2 months before Ms Sturgeon told Parliament she first learned of the complaints. Tiger Woods says he will continue his recovery from a car crash at home after announcing his departure from hospital. Mr Woods underwent surgery on open fractures to his lower right leg and further injuries to his foot and ankle following the crash in Los Angeles last month. The 15-time major winner tweeted saying, "I'm so grateful for the outpouring of support and encouragement that I've received over the past few weeks." The US President Joe Biden has said New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo should resign from his position if the State Attorney General's investigation confirms the sexual harassment allegations against him. Mr Biden made the comments in an interview with ABC News, which is due to air tonight, saying Mr Cuomo would likely be prosecuted if the allegations were proven true. Governor Cuomo, for his part, denies allegations that he sexually harassed or behaved inappropriately towards multiple women. Uber drivers in the UK are to receive the national living wage, pensions and holiday pay from today, after the ride-hailing app lost a case at the Supreme Court last month. More than 70,000 drivers who are now to be treated as workers under UK employment law are now in line for the benefits. Let's speak to our correspondent, Ali Fortescue, who joins us this morning. Good to see you, Ali. I suppose this is certainly good news for many, many Uber drivers, but it doesn't go entirely as far as some of them would have wanted.
Yeah, that's right. There are still concerns about things like the entitlements only lasting from the moment that the passenger gets into the vehicles and ending when the passenger leaves the vehicle. That is something that the drivers that were behind that court battle have already raised concerns about. But of course, I think we all remember that long court battle. It was called a David and Goliath battle about whether those workers should be classed as workers or contractors, culminating, of course, as you say, in the Supreme Court with a victory for the Uber drivers. As you say, they will now be entitled to the national living wage, which is £8.72 an hour. They'll also automatically be enrolled into a pension scheme and get holiday pay based on how much they earn. So those are the basic rights that are now enshrined in UK law that Uber say will come into force from Wednesday. But, as I say, the drivers that were behind that have welcomed it, but still some concerns. Worth saying, Uber say this is an important day, but the unions say that whilst it was the right thing to do, it is a shame, they say, that Uber, as they put it, were dragged kicking and screaming to get here. So, yes, I think the debate about the specific rights when it comes to these Uber drivers will roll on, but whatever way you look at it, this is a significant moment for those 70,000 Uber drivers in the UK and will undoubtedly have a knock-on impact for the gig economy more widely.
Thanks, Ali. Dominic Cummings, remember him? Well, he's going to be giving evidence this morning in front of the All-Party Science and Technology Select Committee. Excuse me, it's the first time that the former Downing Street, well, de facto Chief of Staff, has appeared since his dramatic exit from Number 10 in November last year. Our political correspondent, Tom Rayner, is here in the studio. Morning, Tom. I thought Dominic Cummings generally resisted calls to appear in front of select committees.
Well, he did, didn't he? Back in 2018, he was held in contempt of Parliament for not contributing and attending a select committee hearing on disinformation. But he is going to be giving evidence today on ARIA, that is the Advanced Research and Invention Agency that the government recently announced, widely seen to be his brainchild, if you like. It's modelled on DARPA, which is an advanced research programme in the US. And really, that is something that Dominic Cummings, I imagine, would want to be his political legacy. It's about funneling money into areas where other normal research funding wouldn't necessarily go for it because it would be a gamble, things might not pay off. But if they did, it's described as funding high-risk, high-reward projects. But clearly, there are going to be all sorts of questions that the members of Parliament will want to ask. He is, after all, more famous than most of the Cabinet as a result of his role in Vote Leave, as a result of the notorious lockdown-breaking trip to Barnard Castle, as a result of the £45,000 pay increase that he was given quietly at the start of 2020, which we only found out about really when he left Number 10 in the midst of that highly controversial political infighting that was going on in Downing Street. So it'll be very interesting, Neil, at 9:30 to see how far the MPs limit their questions, the scope of those questions onto ARIA, or whether or not they're tempted to stray somewhat.
I think they might just. Tom, for now, thanks very much indeed. And you can see Mr Cummings' appearance in front of the Science and Technology Committee here on Sky News Breakfast. That will be coming your way, well, just before 9:30. But some other stories making headlines today. Renewed calls for information have been issued to mark the 12th anniversary of the disappearance of the chef, Claudia Lawrence. Miss Lawrence was reported missing in March 2009 after failing to turn up for a shift at the University of York. Police believed the then 35-year-old was murdered, but her body has never been found. Elsewhere this morning, the Foreign Secretary will warn that democracy is in retreat around the world as he sets out why the UK still has a major role to play on the global stage. Dominic Raab will use his speech to argue that democracies face their greatest threat since the end of the Cold War. He'll also stress the need for the UK to use its military, economic, diplomatic and cultural clout to be a force for good in the world. McDonald's has started an investigation after staff in Kent, Merseyside and Greater Manchester restaurants told Sky News that stores have been repeatedly breaking their own health and safety rules during the winter wave of COVID-19. The fast food chain said the accounts were deeply concerning and vowed to ensure that robust safety measures were in place and being followed. P&O Cruises say that holidaymakers will have to prove they've had both doses of a coronavirus vaccine. It comes as the hospitality industry braces itself for the end of a difficult 12 months due to coronavirus lockdown restrictions. Major companies operating in the UK may have been complicit in the forced labour of China's Uyghur minority, that according to a new report. MPs on the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee say many firms can't guarantee that they're not linked with modern slavery there, warning that the government should crack down on forced labour and blacklist companies who can't show clean supply chains. Let's speak now to our Asia correspondent, Tom Cheshire, who's in Beijing. Morning, Tom. Just explain exactly how these Uyghur Muslims, or how we believe these Uyghur Muslims are being used, and the potential effects that there could well be on large parts of the British supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, just to remind you of the whole situation, lots of reports, credible reports, according to the UK government, of the mass detention of the Uyghur minority in northwest China in Xinjiang province. The other part of that is those minorities being allegedly forced to work in camps on all sorts of goods, including cotton, but also electronics. Lots of reports on that. This is something China denies and says is a lie. But this committee was looking at how those products from Xinjiang might end up in the UK, asking all sorts of companies for their supply chain details and concluding that no company, especially in the fashion industry, was able to guarantee that their products did not contain materials partly sourced from Xinjiang. They thought that was astonishing. After so long a time with all these reports. And they went on to make recommendations in a report that's very critical of the government. First, it says, as you say, they should come up with two lists, actually. A white list for companies that have taken steps to try and ensure their supply chains don't include forced labour, and a black list for those companies that haven't done that. And second, they say the government should re-examine applying sanctions to Chinese officials complicit in human rights abuses. They say this is something the US has done, and it's astonishing that the UK government hasn't done the same. This is all in the context, of course, the Defence Review, which wanted to deepen economic links with China. That was the government's position. This is Parliament putting pressure on the government to take a tougher stance.
Tom, many thanks. Time for us to see how the weather is looking this Wednesday. Isabel is here with the details. Morning, Isabel. Give me some good news.
Well, yesterday was amazing. Nearly 16 degrees in Edinburgh, Neil, and about nearly 18 Celsius in the West Midlands yesterday. Very good indeed. What would it be like today? Let's take a look.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Early fog lifting, and there will be plenty of sunshine again today. Some really nice weather thanks to high pressure, a lot of settled weather, but there will be some rain just coming down the eastern side of the country. So it might look all right now, but cloud will thicken across eastern England, and we will find that some rain gradually pushes in through the course of the day. So a bit disappointing as that rain closes in on, for example, Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, for a time into East Anglia and the southeast as well. That's probably where it will be most extensive at lunchtime, and a bit of a cool breeze for that east coast as well. Elsewhere, the sun becomes really quite widespread across Scotland after a fairly cloudy start, and then you just join in really with a good part of northern England, Wales, the southwest and Ireland, and temperatures in a few spots getting up to about 15 to 17 degrees. The northwest clouds over later, and the southeast thankfully dries up for a time.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Isabel, thank you. Still to come this hour. Could the full extent of child sex abuse in English football be about to be revealed? We'll find out next.
should protect our heritage. Unfortunately, it will become part of Azerbaijan.
This monastery is under the protection for now, the next 5 years at least, of Russian peacekeepers. I'm Diana Magny and I'm Sky's Russia correspondent, based here in Moscow. I witnessed the despair of the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh who were digging up the soil of their dead relatives. It's Armenians who've abandoned these villages now. Quite what their strategy is, I'm not sure, but they have made some arrests already today.
They can't kill everyone, they can't shoot everyone, they can't arrest everybody.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. I mean, this clearly says, I love Hitler. Are you saying that doesn't say Hitler? Russia insists that its military build-up in the Arctic is purely defensive.
Welcome back. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, told the programme that now is not the time to launch an inquiry into the government's handling of COVID-19. It comes as some senior doctors, scientific advisors and a former head of the civil service have come together to speak out in favour of a public inquiry. But Mr Kwarteng told me it was premature to do so whilst the pandemic was still ongoing.
Personally, I think that what we have to do is get through the roadmap. I think we've got to reopen the economy. And then once the economy's reopened, once we've got through the worst of the pandemic, and it's still with us, we can have a debate, and I'm sure that there'll be plenty of room for an inquiry. But we haven't, it seems premature to launch an inquiry when the pandemic is still all around us.
Let's bring you a little bit more now on the imminent release of the Sheldon report into historical sex abuse in football. Pleased to say, joining us on the programme, we've got the former Newcastle United midfielder and survivor of abuse, Derek Bell. Derek, great to have you on the programme this morning. Just for our viewers, just if you can, and in as little or as much detail as you wish to go, just tell us a little bit about your story and the horror that you experienced several decades ago.
Yeah, it was quite a traumatic time. I was abused by my abuser for over 4 years as a child, and eventually went to court in 2002. He was jailed for 6 years, and it has had a big impact on my life. I didn't tell anybody about it, my family, my friends, anybody, for a lot of years. So it has been really in the background of what I went through. And eventually, when I confronted my abuser in 2000, and he apologised for what he did, and I used that evidence, tape evidence, to go to the Northumbria police. It resulted in a court case in 2000, and he was jailed for 6 years. And then, obviously, on the back of Andy Woodward coming forward, I waived my anonymity in 2016 in support of other ex-professional footballers. I wanted to help Andy and like Paul Stewart, David White come forward, Steve Walters, and I thought I was in a good place at that time to, not about me, but to try and make sure that this prolific paedophile was put away. That started a new investigation in 2016, and he was jailed for 20 years in 2018. Of that trial in Newcastle Crown Court, over 40 witnesses came forward, since myself and David Eatock from the North East went to the police and raised concerns about George Ormond.
Derek, we're going to talk in a second about the Sheldon report with one of the lawyers who's been working in abuse cases. But I just wonder if you can just speak to our audience just a little bit about what it is like to be a young boy, you know, with the future laid out in front of him, you know, playing football with his friends at a club where, you know, he sees a future. I mean, so many of your dreams were coming true at that point, I presume, and you had this horrific abuse taking place at the same time.
Yeah, it was very, very difficult. It was like anybody living in Newcastle, they wanted to play for the hometown club.
Yeah.
And I was no different. From the age of 10, kicking the ball around in the back streets of the West End of Newcastle. And I joined a boys' club where Ormond would have, hoping that he would help me fulfill my career. He obviously groomed my parents to the extent where he got into my house. And at the time I was young, I knew it was wrong, but his threat was if I didn't perform sexual acts on him or him on me, he wouldn't make me a professional footballer. And for somebody 11, 12-year-old to have that dream taken away from him, I just hid it. I managed to eventually fulfill my dream in 1983. I made a first-team appearance for Newcastle, and it was a fantastic time. 38,000 at St James's Park with Kevin Keegan in the side and Terry McDermott, some of my childhood heroes. So it was an absolute dream to fulfill my potential, if you like, to make the first team. Unfortunately, a knee injury curtailed my career. But in the back of that was always George Ormond. You know, the nightly waking up, sweating, just awful dreams about the abuse. But I tried to keep it in the back of my mind until 1995. After trying to end my life, I was sectioned under the Mental Health Act. Some 20 odd years later, I then sort of disclosed that I'd been abused by a child, as a child. Horrific times during them years, and even over the past, 10 years since the trial in 2002, I still have nightmares. So it's not just myself it impacted on. It impacted on my behaviours, my relationships, and the impact on my family. They felt the guilt, but it was not them that was at fault. It was the abuse that I had suffered has a real impact on my well-being. I'm lucky to say I'm in a good place at the present time. And 2016, hopefully with the Sheldon report coming out, we'll hopefully look at some of the issues that were not around at the time of myself and others who have come forward with historic child abuse, take note.
Derek, I just want to bring in at this point and introduce to our viewers Dino Nocevelli, a lawyer who's specialised in abuse cases. Dino, thanks very much for being on, and I don't know how much of Derek's testimony you were able to hear there, but you've worked with a number of survivors of this type of abuse, and I know that you will know just how important it has been to hear testimony like this. I mean, what do you hope that we hear, or what results from the Sheldon report today?
What my clients and all survivors want is to finally hear the truth, actually, as to how did this happen and how did it happen for so long in so many different clubs for so many different years, and how did no one know about it? And also to learn the lessons. We need to make sure that we never have another Derek Bell, another Andy Woodward. And those hundreds of survivors who have bravely come forward, we need to have listened to them, acted on it, and to have made change. It's so important.
What level of confidence do you have, Dino, that changes have been made, institutional changes have been made at the highest level, all the way down to the grassroots? Hundreds of thousands. Of course, we're in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic, and organised sport for kids has not been going on. But, when it resumes, we have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids who are involved in sports clubs. How confident are you that these days they are much safer than Derek was?
Well, things have moved on. Safeguarding has improved to an extent. However, could abuse still happen today? Will abuse happen, this year, next year? The answer, unfortunately, is yes. In that there's certain things which are not in place: mandatory reporting, accountability. And what we really need from the report today is that not only have we listened, but we've acted on it. And to answer your question openly, how much faith do I have? And I'm holding my breath, actually, until I see the report. It's a 50-50, to be frank. And it's the same for all survivors and all my clients. Trust is so important to survivors of abuse. Just hope the FA haven't let them down again. Yeah, Derek, I just noticed has been nodding along with pretty much everything you were saying there, Derek. Derek, I just want to know, though, how much anger do you still hold, in your heart for what you experienced? I've got to say, as you've spoken very openly, very eloquently. Your testimony has resulted in people being jailed, and you should be lauded for that as a man. You should be lauded for standing up and saying that. But also the other aspect of being a man sometimes is we find it difficult to let go of being angry and upset.
Yeah, I echo everything that Dino has said. We've got to learn from this, and let's not be sitting here in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 20 years' time, talking about the same things. Hopefully this Sheldon report, which I have worked with the QC, Mr. Sheldon, on the report, and give him some recommendations as a survivor of what we should happen. Dino mentioned mandatory reporting. That's a crucial bit of work that should be in place. The government is obviously looking at power of trust, which is going through Parliament at the present time. That will also help coaches be accountable for their actions. But again, the anger, I think, has gone. You never get closure on the situation, even though it's been to court and it's over. You try to get on with your life, and that's what I'm doing. I think the frustration is more of a word that I would use, that it's taken 4 years for this report to be published. And as survivors, I think, we just want it out there. And hopefully Mr. Sheldon has, I'm sure, done a job. And if clubs or persons, we're not trying to shoulder loads of blame here. What we're trying to do is make sure that football is a talisman for all sports, is a lead in safeguarding, in policies and procedures to be put in place, not just in football, in gymnastics, in swimming, in cricket, in rugby, to make sure that our children are safe. When they go out to an environment where they want to enjoy, I didn't have that. It was a purgatory for me to play football, but my release was to play football, to release that pain. I don't want any children to suffer, and hopefully the FA report will highlight some of the failings. And at that point, if clubs were wrong, if things weren't in place, and that's just not football, it could be the police authorities, it could be the education authorities, hold their hands up and say, yeah, we got it wrong, and move on. Let's look at this and take ownership of it in a way where we can take some positivity, hopefully, out of this report.
Let's all keep our fingers crossed. Dino Nocevelli, I hope you don't mind us spending most of our time with Derek Bell, but thank you both for joining us in the programme this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
And if you've been affected by any of the issues mentioned there, the Samaritans are, of course, available 24/7. You can call them 116123, or you can email J-O, at samaritans.org. Those contact details at the bottom just now. But still to come on the programme this morning. As some MPs challenge the Prime Minister's proposed policing bill, I'll be speaking to a human rights barrister about the effects it may have on your right to protest.
A year ago, in fact, on March the 12th, a year ago, Broadway closed, and none of us could believe that Broadway was actually closing. It was unheard of. And I was about to open in Sister Act, start rehearsing, and we rehearsed for one day, and then everything closed down. And we all thought maybe it would be a few weeks, maybe at the most a few months. But here we are actually a year later, and it's just inconceivable that these wonderful theatres at the heart of the West End and at the heart of every town have been dark. A lot of freelancers have dropped very severely through the net, and that's why these charities are so important, because if you're freelance, you go from one job to the other, you're not employed. And so many of the government help schemes, and thank goodness with the 1.57 billion, that did help most theatres stay, you know, so that we've still got them when we all go back. But the freelancers have found it particularly hard, but they've really thought outside the box, and so many people have started other little businesses until they can get back into the theatre. And having support funds like the Theatre Artists Fund, like Acting for Others, like the Fleabag Support Fund, have meant that they could keep going until such time as they're given, you know, their jobs back. And of course, theatre is not just about people like me who appear on the stage. You know, it's so many people backstage, front of house, everybody that it takes to get a show on the road. British theatre is huge. I mean, with Broadway, it's world-beating, and people will come over here just to come to the West End. We need to get that back just to be able to open the country up again so that people will flock into the West End. And of course, it's not just the West End, it's the centre of every single town. And British theatre is absolutely a world-beater. The audiences are absolutely desperate to get back. When I did pantomime down in Southampton, it was glorious. And yes, people were socially distanced and people were wearing masks, but that feeling of love coming from that audience. And of course, in May, please, we can hopefully start the bringing back of theatre, live theatre, with masks, socially distanced. And then hopefully June the 21st, if nothing else happens, we can open maybe Joseph at the Palladium and go all the way through to pantomime, and we can get that whole world up and running again, because it's not just me, it's not just us who miss it, everybody misses it. It's part of our culture, dearly missed.
For the early risers.
As we examine the story beyond the headline.
For the knowledge seekers.
Welcome to Divided States.
For the straight talkers, the curious, and the ones who want to be entertained.
Backstage, Sky News' entertainment podcast.
For wherever you are.
Welcome to the Sophie Ridge on Sunday podcast.
For the ones who want to know more.
Welcome to the All Out Politics podcast.
For the listeners.
From Sky News Storycast.
Sky News Podcasts. Listen and subscribe for free.
Did you know that if we all work together, we can really make a difference to the air pollution around our schools?
Yeah, we should really do that.
Plenty of fine and warm weather for many central and western areas today, with highs of around 16 or possibly 17 Celsius for some. It will cloud over there across the northwest later, and we'll also find some rain and quite a brisk wind for some parts of eastern and southeast England, although that rain should clear through the afternoon. Now, in terms of air quality quite good. So the levels of air pollution again remain low right across the board and are set to stay that way over the next day or two as well.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
MPs have voted in support of the government's new policing bill, moving it a step closer to becoming law. The death of Sarah Everard has, however, sparked a renewed focus on it and its contents. Critics fear it could be used to curtail the rights of people to protest, while ministers say the tough legislation will help keep people safe and contains vital reforms. Pleased to say we're joined on the programme by the human rights barrister, Sailesh Mehta. Sailesh, great to see you this morning. We will, of course, have to wait to see what final form the bill takes when it enters into law. But on the reading of the bill at the second reading, what do you make of it?
Well, the starting point is that we've got to acknowledge that every politician wants to amass as much power for themselves and to crush as much dissent as possible. If that's the starting point, and it should be for every human rights lawyer and every member of the public, then that's the rubric by which this bill needs to be measured. And so the first question is the bill actually necessary? Is the government right when it says that the police and the Home Secretary need these extra powers? And the overwhelming answer is no. The existing law is actually very tough and gives the police and the Home Secretary huge amounts of powers. And the next question then is, can this power, the extra power, be abused? Well, we don't need to do any investigation. We know already from the scenes at the weekend that the police sometimes are capable of making huge errors of judgment. And the more power that the police have to ban demonstrations, to restrict them, the greater the chance that they're going to make more mistakes like they made in the Sarah Everard protests. And of course, the third question is whether the powers that are being given are proportionate. And if the answer to the first two questions is no, not necessary, then of course the final answer is the powers are likely to be disproportionate. And that's what the critics are most concerned about.
Salish, I'm by no means doubting you. You're a barrister. My law degree's 20 years out of date. But can you just justify the first of your assertions there, the idea that the police had sufficient powers? Look at what happened with the Extinction Rebellion protests in central London. Central London brought to a complete standstill for weeks on end. The police, you suggest, could have prevented that?
The existing powers could have prevented all the demonstrations that we've had in the last year. The starting point is that the COVID restrictions allowed the police those powers. But the essential point with all demonstrations and protests is that there's a balance to be struck. And the police normally are the people that strike that balance because they can ban the demonstrations, they can limit it, they can curb the number of people, and they can decide the level of aggression in the policing that should be applied. Now, of course, sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. And the example you've given, there are times when the police got it wrong. But if you look at the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, by and large, the police got it right. And there's a tension between the right of the public to protest, and often these protests are either in breach of the law or in anticipated breach of the law, and of course, the right of the public not to have nuisance, not to have demonstrations disrupting their life. And it's really that balance that everyone is concerned about. And the general feeling amongst human rights lawyers is that the balance is out of kilter with this new bill.
At the risk of being slightly cheeky just for a moment, Salish, isn't it the case that human rights barristers, QCs like yourselves, will challenge any piece of legislation that seeks to amend, diminish, curtail, freedom of association, freedom of assembly?
You're right. And I suppose the test for every bit of this sort of legislation is, what would the Home Secretary have done if the suffragette movement was at the moment just starting? Would our present Home Secretary have had lots of phone calls between herself and Cressida Dick over the weekend to say, go in hard, stop these demonstrations? Or would the Home Secretary and the police have allowed the suffragette movement? That's a good starting point. And you're right, of course, barristers like me will challenge every attempt of a power grab by any politician. That's the nature of the beast.
And just a final thought: where might this end up? Of course, we've got we do not know how the legislation will finally look. But what is your worst case scenario?
The worst case scenario is that there will be so much power given, so much discretionary powers given, and the Home Secretary will have amassed to herself so much power of subsequent legislation without scrutiny in Parliament. This bill allows the Home Secretary even wider powers to legislate on her own or through committee. That's the worst case scenario that people really need to be worried about.
Salish Mehta, good to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us. Time for us to check in, see how the weather's looking.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
High pressure's keeping most of the British Isles fine and dry. The centre of the high is around here. We've got the winds coming around that high, quite brisk at times for the east coast where it'll feel a little chilly, and you will find some rain comes down in the flow as well to affect some eastern parts, particularly through the afternoon, and East Anglia, parts of southeast England as well, seeing some of that rain coming in by lunchtime. Elsewhere, sunshine rather more widespread, not bad in the sunshine as well, highs into the mid-teens, possibly a few spots again up to 16 or 17 Celsius. Very nice indeed. That's into the 60s Fahrenheit. Cloudier, though, for the far northwest later. Misty low cloud with a little drizzle. And we'll still hold on to breeze and a fair amount of cloud in the southeast tonight as well. Just the odd patch of frost in central parts. And tomorrow, a quiet weather day. Some rain in the east, though.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Isabel, thank you very much indeed. Coming up in the 8 o'clock hour on Sky News Breakfast, as we approach the first anniversary of the country going into lockdown, find out why the business secretary thinks now is not the time for a public inquiry.